While my relatives were busy, celebrating their inheritance at my grandfather's burial, I stood off to the side with a wrinkled envelope in my hand. Inside it was nothing but a single airline ticket. That day I became the punchline of their jokes. 6 months later, those same people were desperate to hear the word forgive. My name is Nathan Whitmore, and I'm about to explain how the darkest moment of my life quietly turned into the start of everything I didn't even know I was missing. But before that, you need to meet the cast of characters my grandfather carefully arranged long after his death. There was Preston, my older cousin, dressed head to toe in a $5,000 Armani suit, already rehearsing the speech he planned to give as the future head of the company. His sister, Mallory, hid her thrill behind oversized designer shades, likely deciding which Instagram filter would best show off the yacht she assumed was now hers. Their parents, Vernon and Beatrice, hovered nearby like scavengers who had finally reached the meal they'd been waiting for. My uncle's fingers were practically grabbing at the documents the attorney was holding. And then there was me, the high school history teacher, who had driven 3 hours in a beat-up Honda Civic with worn-out brakes, just to say farewell to the only person in this family who had ever truly understood me. Roland Whitmore, my grandfather, had created an empire from nothing. He turned one fishing boat into Whitmore Shipping Industries, and everyone present wanted their share of what he left behind. Everyone but me. All I wanted was a few more minutes across a chessboard with the man who taught me that the strongest moves are often the ones no one notices until it's too late. That funeral wasn't just about parting ways with Roland Whitmore. It was the moment I realized that the smallest gift can hide the greatest truth, and that the people laughing the loudest are sometimes standing on ground that's about to collapse beneath them. Every weekday morning, my alarm rang at exactly 5:30 a.m., just as it had for the last 6 years since I began teaching at Lincoln High School in Detroit. The ceiling above my one-bedroom apartment still had the same water stain I'd been staring at for 3 years, vaguely shaped like Texas if you squinted long enough. My neighbor's dog barked like clockwork, and through the thin walls I could hear Mrs. Chen starting her morning stretches. This was my reality, routine, humble, and worlds apart from the life I was born into. Being a Whitmore carried weight in certain social circles. It meant private academies, yacht memberships, summer estates, and carefully managed investment accounts. For me, it meant choosing between covering rent or repairing my car's transmission, because I had walked away from all of that to teach teenagers about the Revolutionary War and the Great Depression. My father, Dennis, was the one person who understood that decision. He always had. He passed away when I was 15, collapsing at his desk from a heart attack while reviewing contracts for his brother, Vernon's division of my grandfather's company. He had spent his life being dependable, being overlooked, never objecting when Vernon claimed credit for his work. The last words he ever spoke to me were, "Nathan, don't let them shape you into someone you're not. Your grandfather did that to me, and you can see how that ended." 3 hours later, he was gone. After that, my mother, Grace, held everything together. She worked long 12-hour shifts as a nurse at Detroit General, keeping us afloat after we discovered that Dad had given up most of his company shares to help Vernon escape the consequences of some disastrous investments. That was who my father was. Always fixing other people's mistakes. Always believing that family was something you paid for with sacrifice. Mom never spoke with resentment about any of it, but the way she looked at Vernon during Dad's funeral told me everything. I learned then that the strongest anger doesn't always need to be spoken aloud. Grandfather Roland was an enigma wrapped in a perfectly tailored suit. After World War II, he bought a single boat using his Navy discharge money and slowly built Whitmore Shipping from the ground up. By the time I came into the world, he controlled a fleet of cargo vessels, warehouses spread across 12 cities, and wealth vast enough to buy anything he desired. Yet he had one firm belief: nothing should be handed to anyone. Everything had to be earned. Every birthday card included a $20 bill and the same message: turn this into something more. Christmas gifts were never toys or surprises, only useful things: business books, online accounting courses, lessons meant to sharpen discipline rather than bring joy. The only moments when my grandfather truly paid attention to me were during our Sunday chess matches. It began when I was 10, right after I won my school's chess tournament. One Sunday morning, he arrived at our apartment, set up the board, and said, "Let's see what you can do." I lost in 12 moves. But he returned the next week, and the week after that. Those games became the one steady thread connecting us. Once, he said, "You play like your father, too focused on protecting your pieces, not focused enough on winning." I told him I didn't want to sacrifice everything just to win. That made him smile, the first genuine smile I had ever seen from him. "Maybe that's why you're the only one who still interests me, Nathan," he said. Preston and Mallory never understood those chess games. Preston spent his time following our grandfather around the office, absorbing lessons on profit margins and tax shelters. He earned his MBA from Wharton, the same school grandfather attended, and reminded everyone of it at every opportunity. Family dinners became his personal lecture series on market efficiency and corporate strategy, filled with buzzwords and polished talking points. Mallory chose a different path. She turned herself into a lifestyle brand, documenting her life as a shipping heir on social media. Hundreds of thousands of followers watched her pose on yachts, in designer clothes at glamorous European ports. She called it building a platform, but in truth, she was simply spending grandfather's money while waiting for more. Her proudest accomplishments were earning a verified badge online and dating a Swiss banker who owned a vineyard. Vernon and Beatrice, the parents of Preston and Mallory, were the definition of an empty power couple. Vernon rose to the position of CFO at Whitmore Shipping, though most of the real work was quietly handled by his assistant Beatrice, filled her days attending charity galas, not out of concern for the causes, but for the photos that landed her in society columns. They lived in a mansion so large they needed an intercom just to speak to each other, requested that his will be read in the same oak-paneled room where he'd closed his largest deals over cigars and brandy. The polished mahogany table reflected our faces like a dark, distorted mirror, and across from me I watched Preston adjust his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. We had just come from the cemetery, where cold autumn rain had turned the burial into a muddy ordeal, something Beatrice complained about the entire drive over. "Before we begin," said Mr. Harwick, the family lawyer, straightening his wire-rimmed glasses and clearing his throat, "I want you all to understand that Roland was very deliberate with these arrangements. He reviewed this will just 1 week before he passed." Vernon leaned forward, his hands already clenched with expectation. "We understand, Harwick. Roland went over the succession plan with me in detail. It was a lie, and everyone in that room knew it. My grandfather never discussed business matters outside the office, and he certainly never made promises." Still, Vernon had been telling anyone who would listen that he was set to become CEO, that Preston would stand beside him, and that the Whitmore legacy was locked in place. "Very well," Harwick said, opening the leather-bound folder. "To my eldest son, Vernon Whitmore, and his wife, Beatrice, I leave you the Hamptons estate, and the investment portfolio that includes account number ending in 471. Beatrice instantly clutched Vernon's arm, her diamond bracelet flashing under the lights. "The Hamptons house," she whispered breathlessly. "Oh, Vernon." He remembered how much we adored it there. "To my grandson, Preston Whitmore," Harwick continued, "I leave Whitmore Shipping Industries and all associated operational assets, on the condition that current employment levels are maintained for no less than 1 year." Preston shot to his feet so quickly his chair screeched across the floor. "I knew it," he said triumphantly. "I won't disappoint you, Grandfather." He was already reaching for his phone, no doubt preparing to announce his promotion to the world. "To my granddaughter, Mallory Whitmore," Harwick went on, "I leave the Manhattan penthouse on Central Park West and the yacht Serenity, currently docked in Newport." Mallory let out a shriek of delight. "The penthouse? Are you kidding me?" she gasped. "Do you even know what that's worth? And the yacht?" She laughed wildly. "My followers are going to lose their minds." Then Mr. Harwick turned toward me. For a brief moment, something close to sympathy crossed his face. "And to my grandson, Nathan Whitmore, I leave this." He held up a small white envelope, its edges worn, my name written in my grandfather's unsteady handwriting. The room stayed silent for exactly 2 seconds before Preston burst out laughing. "You've got to be kidding me," he said between chuckles. "That's it, an envelope?" I took it calmly, even though my heart was racing. The envelope felt light, almost meaningless. Inside was a single airline ticket. One way. Destination, Rome. Departure in 48 hours. "Let me guess. Preston said, snatching it from my hand before I could react. Coach class. He laughed louder. This is priceless. The school teacher gets a vacation. Mallory was already filming. This is comedy gold, she said. Nathan, your expression right now, don't worry. Maybe he left you some airline miles too. Vernon rose from his chair, adjusting his tie with the confidence of someone who believed he'd won it all. Roland always said you didn't have the ruthless edge for business. Nathan, he said smugly, at least he gave you something pleasant. Rome is beautiful this season. It's probably his way of saying farewell, Beatrice added sweetly, her tone thick with insincerity. A little getaway to help you cope. How considerate. My mother, who had remained silent in the corner until then, finally spoke. Is that everything, Mr. Harwick? Yes, Harwick said, closing the folder. That concludes the distribution of the estate. There is also a personal letter addressed to Nathan, to be opened only once he arrives in Rome. A letter? Preston was nearly howling now. What's it say? Sorry you're broke, enjoy the pasta? Preston, that's enough, Vernon said, though the smile on his face never faded. Nathan chose his own road, Vernon said. He wanted to be a teacher, and Roland respected that enough to give him a farewell gift. We should all appreciate what we've been given. I glanced down at the ticket again. October 15th, arrival at 3 p.m. An Alitalia flight. Number 61. Why so precise? And why Rome? In all the years I'd spent playing chess with my grandfather, Italy had never once come up. He talked about Shanghai, London, Hamburg, but never Rome. I stood, slipping the ticket back into its envelope. Well, I said quietly, I guess I should start packing. You're actually going? Mallory asked, clearly stunned. You're really using your sick days to take some random trip to Rome. My grandfather gave me a ticket, I replied, meeting each of their gazes one by one. The least I can do is use it. Vernon shook his head. A sentimental fool just like your father. Dennis never understood that emotions don't belong in business either. That was the moment I knew, without any doubt, that I would board that plane. Vernon was wrong about my father, wrong about me, and maybe, just maybe, wrong about what my grandfather had truly left behind. The ticket felt weightless in my pocket, yet somehow heavier than all the millions they had just inherited. As I walked out of the country club, their laughter followed me into the parking lot. I remembered my grandfather's final words to me during our last chess match. The best moves, Nathan, he'd said, are the ones your opponent never sees coming. The rain had stopped, and for the first time that day, sunlight broke through the clouds. That night I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the plane ticket while my laptop showed my bank. Balance, sundarned 847.23. Rent was due in 5 days. My car needed new brake pads. I still had 43 Civil War essays waiting to be graded. Every rational part of my mind screamed that flying to Rome was reckless, but I couldn't stop thinking about my grandfather during our final game. Just 2 weeks before his death. He'd seemed different, softer, as if he'd finally stepped out of a role he'd been playing his entire life. Nathan, he'd said, moving his knight in a way I didn't recognize. What do you know about trust? It's earned, not given, I answered. The same lesson he'd drilled into us since childhood. No, he said gently. True trust is knowing when to follow, even when you don't understand why. Your father knew that. He once trusted me with something precious and I failed him. But you're different, Nathan. You've never wanted anything from me. I never have, I told him. I know, he said. That's why when the moment comes, you'll trust me even when everyone else thinks you're a fool. Now holding the ticket, his words felt less like a memory and more like a message. I picked up my phone and called my mother. I'm going, I said the moment she answered. I knew you would, Grace replied without hesitation. Your grandfather called me last month. He didn't explain much, only that I should support whatever choice you made after the funeral. Mom, this is crazy, I said. I can't afford to miss work. I have responsibilities. Nathan, your father once told me that Roland wasn't always the man we came to know. My mother said softly. He said there was a before and an after in your grandfather's life, and we only ever knew the after. Maybe this trip is about the before. The next morning, I was at Lincoln High arranging coverage for my classes. Dr. Washington, the principal, clearly disliked the sudden request, but since I hadn't taken a single sick day in 6 years, she reluctantly approved 3 days off. 3 days to fly to Rome and figure out what game my Grandfather was really playing. I muttered to myself, "Mr. Whitmore, are you okay?" Jasmine asked after my final class. She was one of my sharpest students. "You seem different today." "I'm just thinking about history," I told her. "About how the most important moments often look meaningless while they're happening." I packed light. One carry-on with 2 changes of clothes and my father's old leather journal, the one I'd carried with me ever since his funeral. The Uber ride to Detroit Metropolitan Airport cost me $32. I honestly couldn't afford, but by then there was no turning back. While waiting at the gate, I pulled the envelope out one more time. That's when I noticed something I'd missed earlier. In the corner, almost invisible, was a small number written in pencil, 1947, the year my grandfather would have been 22. The year after he'd left the Navy. Soon my boarding group was called. I stood in line behind a family, arguing over seat assignments, the mother struggling with 2 kids, the father glued to his phone. Normal people with ordinary problems, not trying to decode a final message from a dead grandfather sending them across the Atlantic. My seat was 32B, a middle seat in the back. Of course, Preston had been right about one thing. It was Coach. The man on my left was already snoring, fast asleep. The woman on my right had claimed both armrests and was watching a movie on her tablet without headphones. As the plane lifted off and Detroit grew smaller beneath us, my thoughts drifted to the rest of the family. Preston was probably already sitting behind my grandfather's desk, feeling like he ruled an empire. Mallory was no doubt posting sunset photos from the yacht. Vernon and Beatrice were likely meeting with financial advisors, planning how to expand their fortune. And here I was, crammed into an economy seat, chasing a mystery I could barely afford. Still, something felt right. For the first time since my grandfather passed, I felt certain I was exactly where I needed to be. The flight attendant stopped beside me. "Something to drink, sir?" "Just water, please." As I twisted the cap open, another memory surfaced, one of our chess games. My grandfather had once sacrificed his queen, the strongest piece on the board, to secure a win. I'd been stunned, unable to understand why he would give up so much. "Power isn't about what you hold on to, Nathan," he'd said. "It's about what you're willing to give up to gain something greater." Most people only see the loss. That's why they never truly win. The plane angled east, cutting through the darkness toward Rome and whatever secret my grandfather had buried there. My cousins believed they had claimed everything of value. But as I settled in for the 8-hour flight, I sensed that my grandfather's true strategy was only beginning and that I was the sole piece he had placed on the board to carry it out. When the captain announced our cruising altitude, I closed my eyes, clutching my father's journal against my chest, placing my faith in the plan of a man who was gone, even though I couldn't yet see the game unfolding. The wheels touched down at Rome's Fiumicino Airport at exactly 3:07 p.m. local time. My legs were stiff, my back ached, and I'd barely slept the entire flight. Italian announcements blended with English as we rolled toward the gate, and suddenly it hit me. I was in Rome, no hotel booked, no itinerary, no clue what I was supposed to do next. Immigration passed in a haze of stamps and tired questions. "Purpose of your visit?" the officer asked in accented English. "I honestly don't know," I answered, too exhausted to invent a story. He studied me for a moment, then stamped my passport. "Welcome to Italy!" I followed the flow of passengers toward baggage claim, even though I only carried a small bag. The arrivals hall was pure chaos, families embracing, drivers holding placards, tourists spinning in circles with maps. I was about to head for the exit when something caught my eye. A clean, professionally printed sign read, "Nathan Whitmore." It was held by a man in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than my car. My heart skipped. I approached cautiously. "I'm Nathan Whitmore." Relief spread across the man's face. Mr. Whitmore, finally. Please come quickly." His English carried a heavy accent but was easy to understand. "Who sent you?" I asked. "Your grandfather. He arranged everything months ago." "My name is Lorenzo. We have a long drive." Before I could object, he took my bag and led me outside to a black Mercedes sedan that likely cost more than my annual salary. The October air was warm, nothing like Detroit's sharp fall chill. Lorenzo opened the rear door and I slid into leather seats so soft they felt unreal. "Where are we going?" I asked as the car pulled away. "Monterey Estate, 1 hour north in the Sabine Hills." "I don't understand," I said. My grandfather never mentioned owning anything in Italy. Lorenzo met my eyes in the rearview mirror. Mr. Rowland owned the estate for 45 years. He visited every September for 1 week, always alone. 45 years. That meant since around 1980, long before I was born. The math didn't add up. Nothing did. We left the sprawl of Rome behind, climbing into rolling hills dotted with olive trees and vineyards. The scenery was almost unbearably beautiful, like a postcard designed to make you question your entire life. Lorenzo drove with fearless confidence, taking curves fast enough that I grabbed the door handle. "How did you know my grandfather?" I asked. "My father was his driver first. When my father died, I took his place. 20 years now. I drove Mr. Rowland every September. 20 years of secret visits. What else had my grandfather kept hidden?" The road narrowed as we passed, through a small village where elderly men sat outside a cafe, watching us roll by. Then Lorenzo turned onto a private drive lined with tall cypress trees. At the end, large iron gates opened automatically. Beyond them stood a villa that stole the air from my lungs. 3 stories of golden stone, wide terraces overlooking endless vineyards, gardens that looked like they belonged in a Renaissance painting. Lorenzo parked before massive wooden doors that appeared centuries old. Before I could fully take it in, the doors opened. An elderly woman stepped outside. She carried herself with quiet elegance, nothing flashy, just pure grace. Her silver hair was pulled into a simple bun, and her eyes were the same sharp gray as my grandfather's. She walked toward me slowly, tears running down her face, and before Lorenzo spoke the words that changed everything, I already knew my life was about to split into a before and an after. "Nathan," Lorenzo said gently, "meet your grandmother, Sophia Whitmore." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. I grabbed the side of the car to steady myself. "That's not possible," I said. "My grandmother died before I was born." Sophia reached me then, taking my hands in hers. Her grip was firm, grounding. "Your American grandmother did pass away, Carol," she said softly. "But I'm very much alive." Her accent was melodic, her English precise and formal. She searched my face as if committing every detail to memory. "You have his eyes," she whispered. "But your father's kindness." She smiled through her tears. "Come inside, Nathan. There is so much you need to know." The villa's interior was refined and warm, nothing like the flashy excess of Vernon and Beatrice's mansion. Sophia guided me into a sitting room where the walls were lined with photographs. My breath caught when I saw them, my grandfather, young and smiling, standing outside a small church, a wedding photo, Rowland and Sophia, barely in their 20s, glowing with happiness. "We were married in 1947, Sophia said quietly, watching my reaction. "Rowland came to Italy with the Navy and stayed after the war to help with rebuilding. We met at a dance in Rome. He was charming, full of hope." She smiled faintly. "We began with nothing, just a few acres of vineyards. A friend sold us for almost nothing." She poured wine into 2 crystal glasses. "This is from our land. Arita, we call it our inheritance." The wine was remarkable, deep, layered, alive. My hands trembled slightly. "I don't understand," I said. "He had an entire life here." "More than a life, Caro," she replied. "He had a family, me, our son, Augusto. Grandchildren he never met because he chose America." She paused, then continued calmly. "Then the Korean War began. Rowland felt duty calling. He was meant to be gone 6 months. There was no anger in her voice, only quiet sorrow. While on leave, he met your American grandmother," Sophia said. "She became pregnant with Vernon. A man of honor would have divorced me, but Rowland could not abandon either life. So he kept them separate, hidden." My hands shook. "So he lived a lie." "No, Nathan," she said gently. "He lived 2 truths. He loved us both in different ways." She sighed. "The vineyard grew. It prospered. He sent money. He visited every year, but he could never choose until now." She crossed the room to an antique desk and returned with a thick folder. "Whitmore Vineyards International," she said. $47 million in assets. It belongs to you." "To me?" I whispered. "He was very clear," she said. "Not Vernon, not Preston, you." The documents were overwhelming. Deeds, contracts, financial statements. Proof that my grandfather had built an entirely separate empire in Italy. But what struck me most was the video Sophia played on an old laptop, recorded just a month before his death. My grandfather's face filled the screen. For the first time I had ever seen him, he looked calm. "Nathan," he said, "if you're watching this, then you trusted me enough to take the flight. Good, you always understood that some things matter more than money. Your cousins received what they always wanted, the image of success. But appearances can be misleading." He paused, his eyes steady. "Whitmore Shipping has been bleeding money. For the last 3 years, I buried it in the numbers," my grandfather continued. "But Preston is about to inherit a sinking ship. The penthouse carries 3 mortgages. The yacht is only leased. The Hamptons property, 70% of it belongs to the bank. I gave them exactly what they showed me they valued. Empty trophies that shine on the surface." He leaned closer to the camera, his gaze sharp. "But you, Nathan, you came every Sunday just to play chess. You never asked for favors, never tried to position yourself. You chose teaching over wealth because you wanted meaning. So I'm giving you what you never requested, the truth. A real family, and yes, wealth that actually exists. The vineyard produces 2 million bottles a year. The villa has been in Sophia's family for 3 centuries. Your Uncle Augusto has been running everything, waiting for you. Your cousins, Marco and Elena, are good people, raised with values. Nothing like Preston and Mallory. This is your true inheritance, a family built on honesty, land that creates something real, and a legacy rooted in work, not deception." He paused, that familiar intensity returning to his eyes. "One more thing, Nathan. Your next move is yours alone, but here's my advice. Preston will call you within a month, desperate for help. Be kinder to him than he ever was to you. That's what will set you apart. Checkmate, my boy." The screen went black. Sophia placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "He spoke of you constantly," she said. "Every visit. Stories about his grandson, the teacher who chose purpose over money. I stayed in Italy for 3 weeks learning everything. Uncle Augusto looked so much like my father that it made my chest ache. He ran the vineyard with quiet competence, never resentful about being the hidden son. Marco and Elena, my Italian cousins, welcomed me as if I were a brother returning home after a long war. They taught me about wine, about the land, about the version of my grandfather they knew. He was different here, Elena told me one evening as we walked between the vines. Lighter. He worked the fields with his hands in the soil, laughing. Not the businessman you remember." Preston's call came exactly 23 days later. I was back in Detroit teaching when my phone rang at midnight. "Nathan, it's Preston. We need to talk." His voice was stripped of arrogance. "The company's bankrupt. The accountants uncovered everything. Dad lost the house. Mallory's penthouse was foreclosed yesterday. It's all gone." "I'm sorry, Preston." "No," he said quietly. "You're not, and you shouldn't be. We treated you terribly." He hesitated, then spoke again. "Grandfather left you something real, didn't he?" "Yes." "Good," he said. "You earned it. You were the only one who loved him instead of his money." The next day I made him an offer, managing U.S. distribution for Arita Wines. Salary only, no ownership. He accepted without hesitation. Mallory took longer to swallow her pride, but eventually she did. Turns out she's actually talented at marketing, especially when she's promoting something real. Not just herself, she's now engaged to Lorenzo's son, living in Rome and learning the wine business from the ground up. Vernon and Beatrice downsized to a small apartment in New Jersey. Vernon works as a bookkeeper. Beatrice at Nordstrom. They don't speak to me, but Preston says they're happier now, relying on each other instead of money. My mother moved into the guest house on the California property I purchased with my first distribution payment. She retired from nursing and now spends her days painting, a dream she'd long put aside. As for me, I still teach, but only part-time. Summers are reserved for Italy, learning the vineyard business and connecting with the family I never knew existed. My students find it hilarious that their history teacher owns a vineyard, and I use it to teach them about international trade, agriculture, and family legacy. Last week I was at the villa playing chess with Uncle Augusto when he said something that stopped me cold. "You know," he said, "your grandfather always said the winner isn't the one who captures the most pieces, but the one who understands which pieces truly matter." I looked at the board, then out at the vineyards, and finally at a photo of my grandfather, young and full of hope in 1947. "He won," I said. "It just took 60 years for the game to end." Augusto smiled. "No, Nathan, you won. You just didn't know you were playing. That crumpled envelope everyone mocked, it wasn't just a plane ticket. It was an invitation to discover who I really was, where I truly came from and what truly mattered. My grandfather gave my cousins what they thought they wanted, and gave me what I didn't even know I needed. The last bottle of wine he personally produced sits unopened in my Detroit apartment. The label reads Heredità 2024, with a note in his handwriting. For Nathan, who understood that the best inheritance isn't what you're given, but what you're trusted to continue. Every Sunday I still play chess, sometimes with Augusto in Italy, sometimes with my students in Detroit, sometimes alone, thinking about the old man who orchestrated the longest, most intricate game I've ever witnessed. He taught me that real wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in truth, family, and the courage to trust even when nothing makes sense. The board everyone else was watching? That was just a distraction. The real game was on a completely different board, in another country, in another language, and my grandfather made sure I was the only one with an invitation to play.